Hi, I am Jocelyn Brown. I'm a native of Pensacola, Florida, by way of Tallahassee and by way of Chicago. I've lived in Chicago now for almost 14 years. I moved here to intern at a record label a long time ago, and that led to a lot of other things, including DJing and generally lurking around in dark corners of bars and being a pest. And now I'm a music supervisor and producer at an ad agency, Leo Burnett. Dan Werland of Favorite Records has invited me to talk about an album, and today we're going to talk about Joni Mitchell's The Hissing of Summer Lawns.
She could see the valley barbecues from her windowsill. See the blue pools in the squinting sun. Hear the hissing of summer lawns. He put up a barbed wire fence to keep out the unknown, and on every metal thorn, just a little blood of his own. She patrols that fence of his to a Latin drum and the hissing of summer lawns. One that makes it easy, with a joyful laugh. Tubes come darkness, 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 no color, no contrast.
My introduction to Joni Mitchell was kind of a really informal and not intentional one. My childhood best friend, Heather Gray, her mother, Jackie Gray, would haul us around in her Volvo when we were little piece of shit 10th grade girls, whining about wanting to be dropped off at the food court at the mall to see our other friends. And inevitably you'd hear Fleetwood Mac or Joni Mitchell or some other form of classic rock playing. And I think the song that kind of pulled me in was the song Help Me from Court and Spark. And I have occasionally heard that song, you know, throughout the years, but I want to kind of dedicate this episode to Miss Jackie and to Heather. Thank you both. I love you very much. May you rest, Miss Jackie. Miss Jackie was kind of like the quintessential California mom. She's California by way of Michigan, but she was like this very lithe, sinewy lady, like super deep tan and blonde hair and her cigarettes, and just really mellow. I always enjoyed being at their house because it was, you know, a much less hectic situation than me being surrounded by my mom and her siblings and my grandparents and all of my cousins, which was the day-to-day reality. But even more to the point, I don't know, it just seemed like some other sort of exotic way of being. So as I grew up and was listening to music, I would find different books and biographies about the people I was listening to. And Joni Mitchell's life figures pretty hugely in two different books that I'm going to pull into the frame here. So the first one is Sheila Weller's Girls Like Us. You know, I don't want to call it a trashy read, but there's some pretty sordid and heavy stuff in here. It's kind of like a triple biography in one. So you're basically getting biographies of Carole King, Joni Mitchell, and Carly Simon all in one. And it basically is kind of a giant biography where all these women's lives and lovers and recording situations and touring situations overlap. It's crazy. It is one of the best books I've ever read, and I recommend it. I also recommend Graham Nash's Wild Tales. So Graham Nash, Mr. Nasty, was Joni Mitchell's lover for a while, and the infamous song Our House that you might have heard on AM radio or classic radio quite a bit was written about his domestic life with Joni Mitchell. I like to think that The Hissing of Summer Lawns was kind of a posthumous examination of that time, because it deals a lot with themes of domesticity and relationships and feeling trapped, and how women have to continually negotiate what little power they've had in those times, in those situations, and what their trade-offs are. This album came out in 1975, and it's really wild to consider, at least in a social sense, how very little has changed. One song in particular I think about is called Edith In The Kingpin, and it's very much like the small town kind of nightclub scene, and you know, you get this young girl going to the club, and in the middle of the club there's this dude that everyone's kind of paying attention to, and you know, for lack of a better way to put it, he's the big fish in the little pond, and nobody really addresses why with her until it's already too late for her. There's a lyric in the song, and it goes, "The big man, he's not listening. His eyes hold Edith, his left hand holds his right. What does that hand desire that he grips it so tight?" Well, the dude is essentially a pimp. Sorry, Dan. Gotta break the fourth wall sometimes, y'all. And by the time Edith makes this realization that, you know, this is what's going on, it's a whole other situation. It's like, okay, well, you're in it now. How are you gonna play this? And there's a lyric, you know, it says, "The past over girls are conferring, the man with the diamond ring is purring, all claws for now withdrawn. One by one they bring his renegade stories to her." And it's just kind of like, man, do I really want to do this? Like, what am I giving up here? What is this situation? And it brings a lot of to mind a lot of different things for me, kind of how even now sensuality and attractiveness are seen as currency. In a very recent social situation I was at Pitchfork, and you know, I'm wandering my way out onto the field to see FK Twigs or whatever, and I'm walking with these two men that I know, two men I happen to love and respect a lot, and they're very casually talking about this recent rap group that features a female member, and they reunited recently, and all of a sudden, just kind of casually within earshot, I hear one of them mention, you know, yeah, she's still pretty hot. And in that moment, it snapped me out of the, you know, mental reverie I was in, and I'm just like, it comes to that, like, this woman's super talented and has a body of work that's influenced a lot of people, and it still only comes to that one simple, sorry, reductive thing. And by that point, by the time I finished thinking that sentence, I'd already left Union Park mentally. Like, I did not want to be there anymore in the company of these people. And I have no hard feelings against these gentlemen now, but it's just one of those things, like, you know, women are so much more. We know that. Other people don't let us be that. And, you know, maybe it's the way masculinity is structured, it's the way society is structured, but in that particular moment, it was important enough for me to acknowledge how I felt and roll with that and go home. And, yeah, sometimes it comes down to that. Whether you intend to be in the grasp of a pimp or not, you end up there, whether you want to or not. And it's just simply by virtue of existing as a woman and trying to navigate your space through the world. You really can't escape it, even if you want to. The next song I will talk about is the title track, The Hissing of Summer Lawns. And, you know, just the small bit of alliteration that occurs within that title itself is pretty crazy to think about, because you've got all these S's going on, like, and you instantly start thinking about, whoa, poisonous snakes, traps, suburbs, what's going on here? There's a series of lines in the second verse that kind of says it all, you know, about married life and domesticity and the hopes that you start out with. You know, you have this fantasy idea of, like, getting a home and settling down somewhere. And there's this line that kind of comes up once the wife in the situation is kind of deep in it and she's really realizing what she's up against. It goes, he put up a barbed wire fence to keep out the unknown, and on every metal thorn just a little blood of his own. And I kind of think about another bit of my personal story with that. So my mom was very staunchly not interested in being married to anybody and being in a serious relationship with anybody, and I always kind of wondered, you know, what that was about. It's not like my grandpa was super strict or anything. He just wasn't really, he lived there, but he wasn't present. Like, home life was my grandma's land. My grandpa went to work, and that's what he did. Even his paycheck was his, and that was clear too. So my mom kind of grew up with this understanding of, okay, if anything's going to get done, we have to be self-sufficient for ourselves. And that's just how that's going to go. And she lived her life that way. Like, by the time my mom was 23, she had a home of her own, already on her second car, had been working full-time for 5 years by that point, and helping my grandma to take care of the rest of our family. So it was very much kind of a matriarchal situation in which she kind of took on the role of the breadwinner and the provider. And it didn't have to be that way, and it kind of just inadvertently became that way. But she very much kind of found herself in a place where she was like, why does anybody need to be married for real? Like, if you can think and you can reason and you're able-bodied, or even if you're not necessarily able-bodied, you can work, you can contribute in some way. Like, you have some say over the story of your life. And being a single parent, being raised in that environment, and seeing not only how my mother ran our household directly, but how my aunts ran their homes and how my uncle ran his home, it was a very different and interesting way of seeing how different people lived. And I saw that every day for 17 years. It gave me a lot of perspective on how people come to make the choices that they do, and even more importantly, that I had choices for myself. I can't begin to thank my mom enough for that, because my own personal agency and autonomy, be it in my personal life, very especially in my work life, have become the two most important things to me. In a social sense, you know, a lot of people in their 20s, they spend their 20s having fun, going to parties, drinking, dating, all the stuff kids do. When I was in my 20s, I didn't do any of that stuff. I spent a lot of time working and kind of really carving out my idea of what my own sense of identity would be. And I'm having a hell of a whole lot of fun in my 30s right now. But it's because I did that work. And going back to Joni Mitchell and a lot of these songs, I think a lot of the female protagonists, save Shades of Scarlet Conquering, which I will leave to you, the listener. A lot of these protagonists end up in situations because they didn't do a lot of self-examination, or they never really were given the latitude to do as much. I moved to New York very briefly for a period of about 11 months, and throwing myself out of that comfort zone because I had no other choice really kind of became a complicated thing. And I found myself really listening to this album quite a bit, because there are a lot of songs here that deal with confronting a shadow self, you know, being radically honest with yourself in moments where it's not comfortable to admit, yeah, you're gotta be trifling here. And I don't think that in 1975, when Joni Mitchell made this album, she would have thought it would have any sort of resonance or relevance to young women 40 years later, but it very much does. There's a track called The Boho Dance where she addresses creativity and art and commerce, and the kind of personal exchanges that go back and forth there to some degree at a personal cost. And it's like, well, okay, you have autonomy and agency, but you still have to live, and you still have to give up a bit of yourself that you'd rather keep. So really, who's playing who here? And there's a lot of that goes on as you grow older, as you face different work situations, as you face different social situations. I'm not immune. A lot of people aren't immune. And it's really relevant to the time. There's a track that closes the album called Shadows and Light, and it kind of serves as a bit of a futuristic hymnal in a way. She talks a lot about blindness and shadows and light, and how people seek right answers and end up being condemned for being wrong. But really, who's in a position to judge? And the very simple fact of the matter is, you'll never have a direct answer to that question. And even more than that, the more you listen to this album, you'll think you'll have a handle on what this album's really about. Every time I've put this record on, I've found a different perspective from which to think about it. Even with the lyrics being what they are. And, you know, Shadows and Light for me is a track that's kind of like a touchstone of sorts, because it's kind of like, you know, are you really living in your own direct truth? Are you really living with a sense of radical honesty? And who's to judge if you are or if you aren't? It's a constant question, and as I said, it's one you can't answer. It's a shapeshifter, much like the musician who created this album. And those are my very direct, very pointed feelings about Joni Mitchell's Edith In The Kingpin. Alright, I'll stop talking now.